Part 1, Author's Foreword. I fear the seemingly incredible story which I am about to relate will be regarded as the result of a distorted intellect, superinduced possibly by the glamour of unveiling a marvelous mystery, rather than a truthful record of the unparalleled experiences related by one Olaf Jansson, whose eloquent madness so appealed to my imagination that all thought of an analytical criticism has been effectually dispelled. It is apparent in the first paragraph of the foreword that we have a gifted writer telling the story on behalf of Olaf Jansson. This author writes prose using alliteration like marvelous mystery. And as I read this tale, written by what I call a gifted writer, you will see many examples of good writing style. I have done a lot of reading, and this author is better than average. Marco Polo will doubtless shift uneasily in his grave at the strange story I am called upon to chronicle. A story as strange as a Munchausen tale. It is also incongruous that I, a disbeliever, should be the one to edit the story of Olaf Jansson, whose name is now for the first time given to the world, yet who must hereafter rank as one of the notables of earth. I freely confess his statements admit no rational analysis, but have to do with the profound mystery concerning the frozen north that for centuries has claimed the attention of scientists and laymen alike. However much they are at variance with the cosmographical manuscripts of the past, these plain statements may be relied upon as a record of the things Olaf Jansson claims to have seen with his own eyes. 100 times I have asked myself whether it is possible that the world's geography is incomplete, and that the startling narrative of Olaf Jansson is predicated upon demonstrable facts. The reader may be able to answer these queries to his own satisfaction, however far the chronicler of this narrative may be from having reached a conviction. Yet sometimes even I am at a loss to know whether I have been led away from an abstract truth by the ignis fatui of a clever superstition, or whether heretofore accepted facts are, after all, founded upon falsity. It may be that the true home of Apollo was not at Delphi, but in that older earth center of which Plato speaks, where he says, quote, Apollo's real home is among the Hyperboreans, in a land of perpetual life, where mythology tells us two doves flying from the opposite ends of the world met in this fair region, the home of Apollo. Indeed, according to Hecataeus, Leto, the mother of Apollo, was born on an island in the Arctic Ocean, far beyond the north wind. Unquote. It is not my intention to attempt a discussion of the theogony of the deities, nor the cosmogony of the world. My simple duty is to enlighten the world concerning a heretofore unknown portion of the universe, as it was seen and described by the Old Norseman, Olaf Jansson. Interest in northern research is international. 11 nations are engaged in or have contributed to the perilous work of trying to solve Earth's one remaining cosmological mystery. There is a saying ancient as the hills, that truth is stranger than fiction. And in a most startling manner has this axiom been brought home to me within the last fortnight. It was just 2 o'clock in the morning when I was aroused from a restful sleep by the vigorous ringing of my doorbell. The untimely disturber proved to be a messenger bearing a note, scrawled almost to the point of illegibility, from an old Norseman by the name of Olaf Jansson. After much deciphering, I made out the writing, which simply said, quote, I am ill unto death, come, unquote. The call was imperative, and I lost no time in making ready to comply. Perhaps I may as well explain here that Olaf Jansson A man who quite recently celebrated his 95th birthday has for the last half-dozen years been living alone in an unpretentious bungalow out Glendale way, a short distance from the business district of Los Angeles, California. It was less than 2 years ago, while out walking one afternoon, that I was attracted by Olaf Jansen's house and its home-like surroundings, toward its owner and occupant, whom I afterward came to know as a believer in the ancient worship of Odin and Thor. There was a gentleness in his face, and a kindly expression in the keenly alert gray eyes of this man who had lived more than 80 years and 10, and withal a sense of loneliness that appealed to my sympathy. Slightly stooped, and with his hands clasped behind him, he walked back and forth with slow and measured tread that day when first we met. I can hardly say what particular motive impelled me to pause in my walk and engage him in conversation. He seemed pleased when I complimented him on the attractiveness of his bungalow and on the well-tended vines and flowers clustering in profusion over its windows, roof, and wide piazza. In Italian, the I would be an L, and we would call that a plaza. I soon discovered that my new acquaintance was no ordinary person, but one profound and learned to a remarkable degree. A man who in the later years of his long life had dug deeply into books and become strong in the power of meditative silence. I encouraged him to talk and soon gathered that he had resided only 6 or 7 years in Southern California, but had passed the dozen years prior in one of the Middle Eastern states. Before that, he had been a fisherman off the coast of Norway, in the region of the Lofoten Islands, from whence he had made trips still farther north to Spitsbergen and even to Franz Josef Land. Now I will show you some images of the places mentioned. This is what the Lofoten Islands look like. The book spells it Lofoden. I labeled this image with the book spelling, but the maps show Lofoten, and there are other variations as well. When I started looking for the Lofoten Islands and Spitsbergen, I was searching for maps, not these colorful photos of the Aurora Borealis or Northern Lights. If you would like to see them, then I can put them up on the screen for your viewing pleasure. One of the images I found on my Google Images search led me to a YouTube video, and so I got out my Wink program and started snapping shots of the changing northern lights. I'm going to show you a few seconds of that now, so you get an idea of what it's like to live near the North Pole, where Santa Claus lives. All this time I thought he was going back home after dropping off presents, and he was living in snow and ice. I had no idea that there is a tropical paradise up there, and Santa actually lives in the Garden of Eden. We were told that the solar wind causes the northern lights, but when I did the video on Admiral Byrd's brief excursion into the hollow earth, I read that the inner sun is what causes the northern lights, and it has nothing to do with the solar wind. You might be curious, why our secret government doesn't want us to know that one can go into the hollow earth where the sun shines 24 hours every day. Maybe because we would all want to go there to escape the tyranny here on the surface where they control everything. As soon as these images finish, I'm going to show you a satellite photo of the hole in the center of the earth. In this image, you see ice all around the hole, and then it's clear of ice, just as the writers of the other books said. There are quotes and footnotes describing how the sea changes as one approaches the opening. If this is true, one should see our sun vanishing and the new sun appearing. And I'm waiting for that description because I can see that if you go inside the earth, there has to be a time when our own sun sets and there is a rise in the new sun inside. This is a strange event, and so it should be noted in the books that Olaf references. Don't you agree? The image coming up on your screen now is very important because he talks about satellite images and he implies secrecy. I will read the text for you because it's a little bit difficult to see. There are just about 3,500 satellites active, looking down to us. None of them show a particular area. Paths of the polar orbit satellites don't cross some significant areas, while on official pictures and footages of satellites, there is a black dot. Don't be fooled by pictures of Google Earth. Those are edited. I found this image with Russian words on it. I will attempt to pronounce it. Karta Vnutrenia Zemli. The first word, karta, means map. I'm fairly sure of that. I don't read Russian, but the letters are somewhat familiar to me. The English says inner Earth map, the generally known inner land map. What I gather is that the Ruskies are onto this and likely know as much or more than we do. And they're probably making deals with the inner Earth people, and we better nuke them before they nuke us. Just kidding. Okay, let's return to the story now. You recall that a message was delivered to a man who was given the task of bringing this to the world because Olaf spent 28 years locked up with maniacs, as he put it, and he didn't want to be persecuted anymore, so he waited until he was almost dead to reveal his secret to the world. The earth is hollow. When I started to make my leave, he seemed reluctant to have me go and asked me to come again. Although at the time I thought nothing of it, I remember now that he made a peculiar remark as I extended my hand in leave-taking. Quote, "You will come again?" he asked. "Yes, you will come again someday, I am sure you will, and I shall show you my library and tell you many things of which you have never dreamed, things so wonderful that it may be you will not believe me." Unquote. I laughingly assured him that I would not only come again, but would be ready to believe whatever he might choose to tell me of his travels and adventures. In the days that followed, I became well acquainted with Olaf Jansson, and little by little he told me his story, so marvelous that its very daring challenges reason and belief. The old Norseman always expressed himself with so much earnestness and sincerity that I became enthralled by his strange narrations. Then came the messenger's call that night, and within the hour I was at the Olaf Jansson bungalow. He was very impatient at the long wait, although after being summoned, I had come immediately to his bedside. "I must hasten," he exclaimed, while yet he held my hand in greeting. "I have much to tell you that you know not, and I will trust no one but you. I fully realize," he went on hurriedly, "that I shall not survive the night. The time has come to join my fathers in great sleep." I adjusted the pillows to make him more comfortable, and assured him that I was glad to be able to serve him in any way possible, for I was beginning to realize the seriousness of his condition. The lateness of the hour, the stillness of the surroundings, the uncanny feeling of being alone with a dying man, together with his weird story, all combined to make my heart beat fast and loud with a feeling for which I have no name. Indeed, there were many times that night by the old Norseman's couch, and there have been many times since, when a sensation rather than a conviction took possession of my very soul. And I seemed not only to believe in, but actually see the strange lands, the strange people, and the strange world of which he told, and to hear the mighty orchestral chorus of 1,000 lusty voices. I have no idea what that means. Lusty voices? This is already such an amazing story. For over 2 hours he seemed endowed with almost superhuman strength, talking rapidly and to all appearances rationally. For a man who is 95 years old, he is amazingly alert. He must have had very clean water all his life, not contaminated with industrial wastes like our water. Finally, he gave me into my hands certain data, drawings, and crude maps. "These," said he in conclusion, "I leave in your hands. If I can have your promise to give them to the world, I shall die happy, because I desire that people may know the truth. For then all mystery concerning the frozen Northland will be explained. There is no chance of your suffering the fate I suffered. They will not put you in irons, nor confine you to a madhouse, because you are not telling your own story but mine. And I, thanks to the gods Odin and Thor, will be in my grave, and so beyond the reach of disbelievers who would persecute." Unquote. Now I'm curious how the author was able to write all this down. Did he bring a tape recorder? Did he know that he was going to hear a man's deathbed confession? How could he capture every word? How could he bring us every detail? If there was a recording, does it still exist? I would like to hear the voice of Olaf Jansson. Without a thought of the far-reaching results the promise entailed, or foreseeing the many sleepless nights which the obligation has since brought me, I gave my hand, and with it a pledge to discharge faithfully his dying wish. As the sun rose over the peaks of the San Jacinto, far to the eastward, the spirit of Olaf Jansson, the navigator, the explorer and worshipper of Odin and Thor, the man whose experiences and travels, as related, are without a parallel in the world's history, passed away, and I was left alone with the dead. It's amazing that he knew he was going to die that night. It's amazing that he had so much energy just before death. And now, after having paid the last sad rites to this strange man from the Lofoten Islands and the still farther northward Ho, the courageous explorer of frozen regions, who in his declining years, after he had passed the 80 mark, which is 80 years old, had sought an asylum of restful peace in the sun-favored California, I will undertake to make public his story. But first of all, let me indulge in one or two reflections. Generation follows generation, and the traditions of the misty past are handed down from sire to son. Beautiful, beautiful. Alliteration. But for some strange reason, interest in the ice-locked unknown does not abate with the receding years, either in the minds of the ignorant or the tutored. How fortunate of Olaf Jansson to find this writer! What are the chances? And who drove these two together? Because it's clear to me that they were put together for a reason. A storyteller and a writer meet. This story comes from that. Let's continue. With each new generation, a restless impulse stirs the hearts of men to capture the veiled citadel of the Arctic, the circle of silence, the land of glaciers, cold wastes of waters and winds that are strangely warm. Increasing interest is manifested in the mountainous icebergs, and marvelous speculations are indulged in concerning the Earth's center of gravity, the cradle of the tides, where the whales have their nurseries, where the magnetic needle goes mad, where the aurora borealis illuminates the night, and where brave and courageous spirits of every generation dare to venture and explore, defying the dangers of the farthest north. This is beautiful writing. One of the ablest works of recent years is Paradise Found, or The Cradle of the Human Race at the North Pole, unquote, by William F. Warren. In his carefully prepared volume, Mr. Warren almost stubbed his toe against the real truth, but missed it, seemingly, by only a hair's breadth, if the Old Norseman's revelation be true. What does that mean? I'm not sure. This is going to blow you away. Dr. Orville Livingston Leach, a scientist, in a recent article says, "The possibilities of land inside the earth were first brought to my attention when I picked up a geode on the shores of the Great Lakes. The geode is a spherical and apparently solid stone, but when broken is found to be hollow and coated with crystals. The earth is only a large form of a geode, and the law that created the geode in its hollow form undoubtedly fashioned the earth in the same way." Unquote. In presenting the theme of this almost incredible story, as told by Olaf Jansson, and supplemented by manuscript, maps, and crude drawings entrusted to me, a fitting introduction is found in the following quotation. Quote, "In the beginning God created the heaven and earth, and the earth was without form and void," unquote. And also, quote, "God created man in his own image," unquote. Therefore, even in things material, man must be godlike, because he is in the likeness of the Father. A man builds a house for himself and family. The porches or verandas are all without and are secondary. The building is really constructed for the conveniences within. Olaf Jansson makes the startling announcement through me, a humble instrument, that in like manner God created the earth for the within, that is to say, for its lands, seas, rivers, mountains, forests, and valleys, and for its other internal conveniences. While the outside surface of the earth is merely the veranda, the porch, where things grow by comparison but sparsely, like the lichen on the mountainside clinging determinedly for bare existence. Take an eggshell, and from each end break out a piece as large as the end of this pencil. Extract its contents, and then you will have a perfect representation of Olaf Jansson's earth. The distance from the inside surface to the outside surface, according to him, is about 300 miles. The center of gravity is not in the center of the earth, but in the center of the shell or crust. Therefore, if the thickness of the earth's crust or shell is 300 miles, the center of gravity is 150 miles below the surface. This is amazing. In their logbooks, Arctic explorers tell us of the dipping of the needle as the vessel sails in regions of the farthest north known. In reality, they are at the curve, on the edge of the shell, where gravity is geometrically increased. And while the electric current seemingly dashes off into space toward the phantom idea of the North Pole, yet the same electric current drops again and continues its course southward along the inside surface of the Earth's crust. In the appendix to his work, Captain Sabine gives an account of experiments to determine the acceleration of the pendulum in different latitudes. This appears to have resulted from the joint labor of Peary and Sabine. He says, quote, "The accidental discovery that a pendulum on being removed from Paris to the neighborhood of the equator increased its time of vibration gave the first step to our present knowledge that the polar axis of the globe is less than the equatorial, that the force of gravity at the surface of the earth increases progressively from the equator toward the poles." According to Olaf Jansen, in the beginning, this old world of ours was created solely for the within world, where are located four great rivers, the Euphrates, the Pison, the Gihon, and the Hiddekel. These same names of rivers, when applied to streams on the outside surface of the earth, are purely traditional from an antiquity beyond the memory of man. On the top of a high mountain, near the fountainhead of these four rivers, Olaf Jansen, the Norseman, claims to have discovered the long-lost Garden of Eden, the veritable navel of the earth, and to have spent over 2 years studying and reconnoitering in this marvelous within land, exuberant with stupendous plant life and abounding in giant animals, a land where the people lived to be centuries old after the order of Methuselah and other biblical characters, a region where 1/4 of the inner surface is water and 3/4 land, where there are large oceans and many rivers and lakes, where the cities are superlative in construction and magnificence, where modes of transportation are as far in advance of ours as we, with our boasted achievements, are in advance of the inhabitants of darkest Africa. The distance directly across the space from inner surface to inner surface is about 600 miles less than the recognized diameter of the Earth, which, by the way, is about 3,984 miles, I think. Very close to 4,000 miles. So this inner area has to be about 3,300 miles. In the identical center of this vast vacuum is the seat of electricity, a mammoth ball of dull red fire, not startlingly brilliant, but surrounded by a white, mild, luminous cloud, giving out uniform warmth, and held in its place in the center of this internal space by the immutable law of gravitation. This electrical cloud is known to the people within as the abode of the smoky god. They believe it to be the throne of the Most High. Olaf Jansen reminded me of how in the old college days we were all familiar with the laboratory demonstrations of centrifugal motion, which clearly proved that if the earth were a solid, the rapidity of its revolution upon its axis would tear it into 1,000 fragments. The old Norsemen also maintained that from the farthest points of land on the islands of Spitzbergen and Franz Josef Land, flocks of geese may be seen annually flying still farther northward, just as the sailors and explorers record in their logbooks. No scientist has yet been audacious enough to attempt to explain, even to his own satisfaction, toward what lands these winged fowls are guided by their subtle instinct. However, Olaf Jansen has given us a most reasonable explanation. I want to go there. I want to go to the hollow earth. The presence of the open sea in the Northland is also explained. Olaf Jansen claims that the northern aperture, intake or hole, so to speak, is about 1,400 miles across. In connection with this, let us read what explorer Nansen writes on page 288 of his book, quote, "I have never had such a splendid sail on to the north, steadily north, with a good wind, as fast as steam and sail can take us. An open sea mile after mile, watch after watch, through these unknown regions, always clearer and clearer of ice. One might almost say, quote, how long will it last? The eye always turns to the northward as one paces the bridge. It is gazing into the future, but there is always the same dark sky, which means open sea. Again, the Norwood Review of England, in its issue of May 10th, 1884, says, quote, "We do not admit that there is ice up to the pole. Once inside the great ice barrier, a new world breaks upon the explorer. The climate is mild, like that of England, and after balmy as the Greek Isles." Ooh, this is an amazing story, and there is plenty of evidence to support his claims, including Admiral Byrd. Some of the rivers within, Olaf Jansen claims, are larger than our Mississippi and Amazon rivers combined in point of volume of water carried. Indeed, their greatness is occasioned by their width and depth rather than their length. And it is at the mouths of these mighty rivers, as they flow northward and southward along the inside surface of the earth, that mammoth icebergs are found, some of them 15 and 20 miles wide and from 40 to 100 miles in length. Well, I'm confused now because there are questions. If you have rainfall, it's typically air that's pushed up. So what is the air like there? I mean, what causes the air to move? We have sunlight, and the sunlight varies. This is a smoky god sunlight made of iron, and it's a red glow. And it's a continuous glow. So how would you have winds? You don't have winds unless you have a variance of sunlight. If there's a cloud that blocks the light from the earth, it will be cooler there, and the winds will come in. And in the desert where it's all sunny, the winds go out, or they heat up and rise, and it causes monsoon rains. So how does it rain if you don't have any winds? None of this is explained. In 2 years, he certainly would have had questions. We have no explanation of this. Now we're told that there are icebergs. Why would there be icebergs? Where is it going to be cold? You have a steady glow, and every point of Earth is the same distance from the steady glow. There is no sunlight falling on the North Pole during the summer and the South Pole during their summer. If we don't get the answers to these questions, then they remain open questions. And nobody can conclude whether this is a true story or not until they have the answers to all of their questions. Admiral Byrd was escorted in. He was controlled every place he went. He did not spend 2 years there. We just read that Olaf Jansen spent 2 years there. If he met with the people and they spoke in a strange tongue, how did he communicate with them? Were they telepathic? They have advanced technology. Some people say that these are the people left over from Atlantis. The Atlanteans were advanced. Were they advanced enough to fly to the North Pole and go inside the Earth? How come no pilots ever talk about going inside the Earth? The sea lanes opened in the North, and Russia is using them. Russia claims to own the North Pole. Don't they choose to sail along the waters where there is no ice, and the ducks fly north from there into the interior of the Earth? As we begin to discuss this with each other, we're going to come up with more questions, and every one of them has to be answered to our complete satisfaction in order to join this wagon train of belief, because you can get duped easily. You have to ask questions always, a lot of questions, and reach no conclusion until you're done with all the questions. Is it not strange that there has never been an iceberg encountered either at the Arctic or Antarctic Ocean that is not composed of fresh water? Modern scientists claim that freezing eliminates the salt, but Olaf Jansen claims differently. Ancient Hindu, Japanese, and Chinese writings, as well as hieroglyphics of the extinct races of the North American continent, all speak of the custom of sun worshipping. And it is possible, in the startling light of Olaf Jansen's revelations, that the people of the inner world, lured away by glimpses of the sun as it shone upon the inner surface of the earth, either from the northern or southern opening, became dissatisfied with the smoky god. the great pillar or mother cloud of electricity, and, weary of their continuously mild and pleasant atmosphere, followed the brighter light, and were finally led beyond the ice belt and scattered over the outer surface of the earth, through Asia, Europe, North America, and later Africa, Australia, and South America. I'll read that footnote. The following quotation is significant. Quote, "It follows that man issuing from a mother region, still undetermined, but which a number of considerations indicate to have been in the north, has radiated in several directions, that his migrations have been constantly from north to south." M. Le Marquis G. de Saporta, in Popular Science Monthly, October 1883, page 753. It is a notable fact that, as we approach the equator, the stature of the human race grows less. But the Patagonians of South America are probably the only aborigines from the center of the earth who came out through the aperture usually designated as the South Pole, and they are called the giant race. Olaf Jansen avers that, in the beginning, the world was created by the great architect of the universe, so that man might dwell upon its inside surface, which has ever since been the habitation of the chosen. Okay, we have another problem, or question, I should say. Every 3,000 or 4,000 years, we have a pole shift. When there's a pole shift, what happens to the hole? Does it form a new hole? If so, aren't a lot of people killed? If you're living on the place that becomes the hole, isn't your house going to disappear? How does that work? They who were driven out of the Garden of Eden brought their traditional history with them. The history of the people living within contains a narrative suggesting the story of Noah and the ark, with which we are familiar. He sailed away, as did Columbus, from a certain port to a strange land he had heard of far to the northward, carrying with him all manner of beasts of the fields and fowls of the air, but was never heard of afterward. The story of Noah's Ark is fiction. Maybe it's a symbolic story, but it's not possible to put lions and tigers. Who's going to catch them and put them on the boat? And when you put them on the boat next to a sheep, what do you think the big cats are going to do? They're going to eat them. You put two of each on the boat. What do you do? Walk around with lions and tigers there, hungry? This is a crazy story. A child could figure out that it's fake. But you have grown people believing the 9/11 lie, or that Al-Qaeda is real, or ISIS. How come Al-Qaeda was retired so quickly, so easily? Did someone have total control of them? Of course. That's the only way you could retire a group that's supposed to be committing terrorist acts all over the place and so strong and powerful that the world's superpower can't defeat them. This is insanity. The story of Santa Claus coming down the chimney is insanity. He doesn't come down the chimney, he knocks on the front door. And if he has nice presents, you let him in. Just kidding. Let's go back to the story. What did you bring me? I don't want this piece of junk. Where did you get it? Target? Walmart? Get out of here. Take your reindeer with you. On the northern boundaries of Alaska, and still more frequently on the Siberian coast, are found boneyards containing the tusks of ivory in quantities so great as to suggest the burying places of antiquity. Why would anybody bury a mammoth? From Olaf Jansen's account, they have come from the great prolific animal life that abounds in the fields and forests on the banks of numerous rivers of the inner world. The materials were caught in the ocean currents or were carried on the ice floes, and have accumulated like driftwood on the Siberian coast. This has been going on for ages, and hence these mysterious boneyards. When scientists collect the facts, that's okay with me. When scientists draw a conclusion, it's not okay with me. The conclusion should leap out from the facts. Nobody needs to draw a conclusion because when all the facts are there and understood, the conclusion is obvious. We should not leap to conclusions. We don't know how these bones accumulated there. Suppose there was a pole shift and this was a warm area. Then you're going to have tropical animals like you have in Africa. Olaf Jansen is the only one that I know that lived in the center of the earth, the hollow earth, for 2 years. Admiral Byrd flew in and flew out on the same day. It was only an hour stay or maybe 2. He didn't say. He just met with some people, talked, and he left. He was escorted in, escorted out. It was almost as if he wasn't allowed to be inside the center of the earth. Now, Olaf Jansen sails in and stays for 2 years. What do these inner earth people think about us crashing in on their world? They know we're belligerent, they know we set off atomic weapons, and they know it's very dangerous. If the ocean waters flow from the outside world to the inside world, because it sounds like the waterway is continuous, then wouldn't salt water mix with fresh water? If the center of gravity is the center of the 300-mile thickness of the earth, then this is what's pulling on everything on the inner world. And so water evaporates, is airborne, and it cools, apparently, when it gets close to the sun. But that doesn't make any sense. If all the heat is coming from the center sun, when things rise, they should get hotter. So how does that work? How does the water fall out? If the center is hot and everything moves to the center, it'll be capable of handling more water. You'll have more water dissolved in the air. Now, that air moves. It goes to a cooler place and rain falls. But how does the air move? We have warmer areas and cooler areas, and I understand that. It seems that the farther you are from this glowing sun on the inside, this smoky god, the cooler it would be. Why are there icebergs, and why aren't there icebergs everywhere? If there are icebergs anywhere, why aren't they everywhere? Because everywhere is the same distance from the center. What would it be like to live in an inner world where your sun is in the sky above your head, but so is land? You're looking across 4,000 miles, and you're seeing land and oceans on the other side. If you have a nice telescope, you could easily see people 4,000 miles away. That's not to the moon. The moon is 240,000 miles away, averaging apogee and perigee. It's 238 on the near side, and the far side is 242,000 miles. So you could easily see somebody 4,000 miles away. No, that's not right. When you're in an airplane, you're only 35,000 feet, 5 or 6 miles, and the people look like dots. I think it would be so smoky, this smoky god in the center that illuminates the water vapor in the air, you're not going to be able to see anything on the other side. You look up, you'll see just clouds, 5 or 6 miles high, and that's it. You'll be able to see this glowing sun. I have a lot of questions. I don't have any answers. On this subject, William F. Warren, in his book already cited, pages 297 and 298, says, quote, "The Arctic rocks tell of a lost Atlantis more wonderful than Plato's. The fossil ivory beds of Siberia excel everything of the kind in the world. From the days of Pliny, at least, they have constantly been undergoing exploitation, and still they are the chief headquarters of supply. The remains of mammoths are so abundant that, as Gratacap says, the northern islands of Siberia seem built up of crowded bones. Another scientific writer, speaking of the islands of New Siberia, northward of the mouth of the river Lena, uses this language. Large quantities of ivory are dug out of the ground every year. Indeed, some of the islands are believed to be nothing but an accumulation of drift timber and the bodies of mammoths and other antediluvian animals frozen together. From this we may infer that during the years that have elapsed since the Russian conquest of Siberia, useful tusks from more than 20,000 mammoths have been collected." Unquote. Well, I would like to offer an explanation for consideration. A pole shift takes place, and volcanoes are going off, because that's what we have right now. All the volcanoes that were active over the past 10,000 years are all active today, because we're about to have a pole shift. A volcano blows water vapor into the sky. It rises up, freezes, and comes down. It lands on a bunch of mammoths, 20,000 of them, in a tropical area, and they are flash frozen, so they're all dead. Because the water comes down so cold, everything is frozen. We had 100-degree heat here in Arizona, and we had ice cubes coming from the sky, hail, and they were as big as a big grape. I was totally surprised. The water rose up high enough that it got cold and froze. We have over 100 degrees on the ground, and it's less than 32 degrees Fahrenheit at some height where this rain is falling from. Totally a surprise. Now, a volcano blows, and instead of water vapor rising naturally, it's blown up. And it's blown up 30,000 feet, as high as Mount Everest. Mount Everest is so cold, and there's so little oxygen, and now we have water going up to that height. It's very cold, and it freezes, and it comes down and flash freezes all these mammoths. Now there's a pole shift, and you've got water sloshing all over the place for a while, and it washes up on these islands, where they find so many tusks. These are not burial grounds because they don't bury mammoths. They were flash frozen. They died, and all these 20,000 animals' tusks are washed up on the islands. A mammoth has a lot of fat, and he'll float in water, probably. I don't know for sure, but I would say that fat floats. A volcano can certainly spew water vapor high into the atmosphere, high, and it comes down all at once. And it could land on an area and flash freeze animals, especially if there's a pole shift in that area, Siberia, that used to be tropical, and all these animals that they found have tropical plants in their mouths and their stomachs. The meat is 4,000 years old, but it was flash frozen, and it remained frozen for 4,000 years. When it began to thaw, they were feeding it to their sled dogs. This happened in the 1800s. Now, why is the snow melting after 4,000 years? Because we're getting ready for another one. Where was the North Pole before? It was in Greenland, I believe. But Greenland has melted, and they're not telling us why. So we're not going to believe any scientist who doesn't do his job correctly. He's supposed to collect the facts and hold off on the conclusion. Just collect the facts. That's all we need, is the facts. What we know for sure is that there are 20,000 animals' tusks washed up on the beach. It suggests that they were floating in the ocean. Why did they all collect on this beach? How did they die? When they're frozen in the snow and you're feeding the meat to the sled dogs, you have a preserved specimen, far too valuable to be feeding to sled dogs. When they're dead and they're washed up on the islands or the land in large numbers, it tells you they all died at once. There was a catastrophic event, especially if you have animals of various ages all dying together. What is it like when volcanoes blow water vapor into the high atmosphere and it freezes and comes down? How does it come down? Slush? Does it come down as ice? Does it kill them with impacts? Are there hail as big as a softball? I have heard recently of hail as big as a softball. And hail where I live is totally out of the question. I never saw it before. Totally surprised that we could have hail on a day when the temperature was over 100 degrees. Okay, let's read the last card in the beginning part of this book. But now for the story of Olaf Jansson. I give it in detail as set down by himself in manuscript, and woven into the tale, just as he placed them, are certain quotations from recent works on Arctic exploration, showing how carefully the old Norseman compared with his own experiences those of other voyagers to the frozen north. Thus wrote the disciple of Odin and Thor. Thor. There was a gentleness in his face, and a kindly expression in the keenly alert gray eyes of this man who had lived more than 80 years and 10, and withal a sense of loneliness that appealed to my sympathy. Slightly stooped, and with his hands clasped behind him, he walked back and forth with slow and measured tread that day when first we met. I can hardly say what particular motive impelled me to pause in my walk and engage him in conversation. He seemed pleased when I complimented him on the attractiveness of his bungalow and on the well-tended vines and flowers clustering in profusion over its windows, roof, and wide piazza. In Italian, the I would be an L, and we would call that a plaza. I soon discovered that my new acquaintance was no ordinary person, but one profound and learned to a remarkable degree. A man who in the later years of his long life had dug deeply into books and become strong in the power of meditative silence. I encouraged him to talk and soon gathered that he had resided only 6 or 7 years in Southern California, but had passed the dozen years prior in one of the Middle Eastern states. Before that, he had been a fisherman off the coast of Norway, in the region of the Lofoten Islands, from whence he had made trips still farther north to Spitzbergen and even to Franz Joseph Land. Now I will show you some images of the places mentioned. This is what the Lofoten Islands look like. The book spells it Lofoden. I labeled this image with the book spelling, but the maps show Lofoten, and there are other variations as well. When I started looking for the Lofoten Islands and Spitzbergen, I was searching for maps, not these colorful photos of the aurora borealis or northern lights. If you would like to see them, then I can put them up on the screen for your viewing pleasure. One of the images I found on my Google Images search led me to a YouTube video, and so I got out my Wink program and started snapping shots of the changing northern lights. I'm going to show you a few seconds of that now, so you get an idea of what it's like to live near the North Pole, where Santa Claus lives. All this time I thought he was going back home after dropping off presents, and he was living in snow and ice. I had no idea. Part 1, Author's Foreword. I fear the seemingly incredible story which I am about to relate will be regarded as the result of a distorted intellect, superinduced possibly by the glamour of unveiling a marvelous mystery, rather than a truthful record of the unparalleled experiences related by one Olaf Jansen, whose eloquent madness so appealed to my imagination that all thought of an analytical criticism has been effectually dispelled. It is apparent in the first paragraph of the foreword that we have a gifted writer telling the story on behalf of Olaf Jansen. This author writes prose using alliteration like marvelous mystery. And as I read this tale, written by what I call a gifted writer, you will see many examples of good writing style. I have done a lot of reading, and this author is better than average. Marco Polo will doubtless shift uneasily in his grave at the strange story I am called upon to chronicle. A story as strange as a Munchausen tale. It is also incongruous that I, a disbeliever, should be the one to edit the story of Olaf Jansen, whose name is now for the first time given to the world, yet who must hereafter rank as one of the notables of earth. I freely confess his statements admit no rational analysis, but have to do with the profound mystery concerning the frozen north that for centuries has claimed the attention of science, seen and described by the Old Norseman Olaf Jansen. Interest in northern research is international. 11 nations are engaged in or have contributed to the perilous work of trying to solve Earth's one remaining cosmological mystery. There is a saying ancient as the hills, that truth is stranger than fiction. And in a most startling manner has this axiom been brought home to me within the last fortnight. It was just 2 o'clock in the morning when I was aroused from a restful sleep by the vigorous ringing of my doorbell. The untimely disturber proved to be a messenger bearing a note, scrawled almost to the point of illegibility, from an old Norseman by the name of Olaf Jansen. After much deciphering, I made out the writing, which simply said, quote, "I am ill unto death, come," unquote. The call was imperative, and I lost no time in making ready to comply. Perhaps I may as well explain here that Olaf Jansen, a man who quite recently celebrated his 95th birthday, has for the last half-dozen years been living alone in an unpretentious bungalow out Glendale way, a short distance from the business district of Los Angeles, California. It was less than 2 years ago, while out walking one afternoon, that I was attracted by Olaf Jansen's house and its home-like surroundings, toward its owner and occupant, whom I afterward came to know as a believer in the ancient worship of Odin and Thisonlaman alike. However much they are at variance with the cosmographical manuscripts of the past, these plain statements may be relied upon as a record of the things Olaf Jansen claims to have seen with his own eyes. 100 times I have asked myself whether it is possible that the world's geography is incomplete, and that the startling narrative of Olaf Jansen is predicated upon demonstrable facts. The reader may be able to answer these queries to his own satisfaction, however far the chronicler of this narrative may be from having reached a conviction. Yet sometimes even I am at a loss to know whether I have been led away from an abstract truth by the ignis fatui of a clever superstition, or whether heretofore accepted facts are, after all, founded upon falsity. It may be that the true home of Apollo was not at Delphi, but in that older earth center of which Plato speaks, where he says, quote, "Apollo's real home is among the Hyperboreans, in a land of perpetual life, where mythology tells us 2 doves flying from the opposite ends of the world met in this fair region, the home of Apollo. Indeed, according to Hecataeus, Leto, the mother of Apollo, was born on an island in the Arctic Ocean, far beyond the north wind." Unquote. It is not my intention to attempt a discussion of the theogony of the deities, nor the cosmogony of the world. My simple duty is to enlighten the world concerning a heretofore unknown portion of the universe, as it was